Welcome back to the deep dive. We grab the sources you send us, we pull them apart, and we give you the expertise you need fast.
And today we're looking at a document that is, well, it's pretty profound and deeply rooted in frustration.
It's one of the most provocative things we've seen in a while. It offers this radical, really specific, and frankly, pretty shocking diagnosis of poverty and suffering.
It really does. The source material we have was written by an author who identifies himself right up front as poor.
Yeah.
And he puts forward this thesis that just completely reframes how you might think about oppression. He's suggesting the main source of suffering for the poor isn't some external pressure from the top,
No.
but conflict generated among the poor themselves.
And that is the mission for this deep dive. We're going to follow this author's controversial logic, dissect his evidence, and then look at the really radical solution he proposes.
He grabs you right away.
Oh, immediately. The first line is basically, I am a poor man, so I know the source of poor people's suffering.
And from there, he lays out three main external factors for that suffering. The first two are, what you'd expect, the things traditional discourse focuses on.
Right.
First, harsh governance, oppressive political systems. And second, natural disasters. And he lumps diseases into that category as well.
Exactly, you expect those. But then he hits you with the third one, and it just shifts the entire ground under your feet.
Mutual tormenting among the poor.
That's it. That internal cruelty, he says, is the main driver of pain.
And what's so fascinating is the sheer mathematical weight he puts on this. He argues that of those three things, governance, nature, and this mutual torment, the internal stuff is the main cause.
He even tries to quantify it, which is just wild. He claims that at least 75% of the misery felt by the poor comes directly from the poor hurting one another.
75%?
I mean, that is an enormous, just arresting claim. It makes you ask right away.
Yeah.
Is that a real number? Is it empirical?
Or is it a rhetorical device?
Yeah, is he just trying to shock you into buying his argument about internal cruelty?
I think it's meant to be both. By putting a number on it, he forces you to question the weight of external oppression. It's a strategy to say, the most addressable source of pain is actually the one we inflict on ourselves.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you're going to make a claim that huge, you have to define your terms. First up, who are the poor?
And this is where the source uses an incredibly broad brush. It's intentional. The definition of poverty here goes way beyond just, income brackets.
Right.
It's not about how much money you make. It's about a shared lack of basic security and power compared to the elite.
The list he provides is extensive. It starts with the groups you'd expect: farmers, workers, peddlers, wage earners, migrant workers. That'll make sense.
But then he starts to deliberately blur the lines.
Yeah.
He pulls in people who have these low-level institutional jobs but are still, economically on the margins. Public service personnel, cleaners, urban management officers, security guards, police, soldiers.
And that's such a crucial move. By including the people on the lowest rungs of state authority, his thesis can now apply to almost any social interaction.
Absolutely. And the list keeps going up, still under the label of the poor, teachers, and civil servants.
So who's left?
Almost no one. If you look at who he excludes, everyone is poor except for the super wealthy officials, the intelligentsia, scholars, and celebrities.
So what he's doing here is setting up this premise that almost everyone is in this state of poorness defined by this constant material anxiety.
Exactly. And that condition makes mutual bullying this pervasive universal thing. And his key argument is the closer you are to the bottom, the more cruelly you bully each other.
Because the competition is fiercest there.
It's a structural argument. The people who should be united in solidarity are instead turning on each other with the most intensity.
Which brings us to his evidence. And here's where it gets really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't just generalize. He gives 8 specific examples of poor people bullying the poor.
Yeah, and these examples are all designed to highlight this deep irony.
What? That people get a tiny bit of power and just weaponize it.
Precisely. They weaponize it against people who are fundamentally their own economic peers.
And the number one example he uses, which just perfectly captures the whole thesis, is the urban management officers, the Chingan bullying street peddlers.
Mm-hmm. And the source is careful to note that these Chingan are themselves originally weak and poor. They're often low-wage, temporary workers.
Right, they're not the elite.
Not at all. But because they have this little bit of state power, they can seize goods, give fines, they become the immediate oppressor. The source says they bully peddlers mercilessly, even describing them knocking the elderly to the ground.
And that connects right back to that 75% claim. The author's arguing that the daily trauma from that kind of pour-on-pour violence is worse than some abstract policy from a distant official.
It's a powerful point about how quickly compassion vanishes when you get even a slight leg up. And the list goes on. Police setting up arbitrary obstacles, security guards getting into beatings.
He also, really cleverly, includes criminals in this. His fourth example is just thieves stealing the property of the poor.
Exactly. Even crime becomes an act of pour-on-pour cruelty because the criminals often come from the same background as their victims.
Then the list sort of jumps. It gets a bit more abstract. He talks about civil servants being jealous and suppressing each other.
Or teachers threatening their students' parents, civil servants using bureaucracy to make life difficult for others.
It shows he's trying to make this a universal thing. It's not just physical violence. It's this institutional malice, this jealousy.
Right. And then comes the last, and maybe the most startling example. Soldiers killing other conscripted soldiers.
Yeah, that one seems like a huge leap from a traffic cop hassling someone. Does that maybe, I don't know, overextend his thesis a bit?
It definitely challenges you, but I think it's intentional. He needs to show this cruelty is universal, that it happens even in the most communal, high-stakes places like the military. It suggests the underlying anxiety infects every single relationship.
And not just institutional ones. He makes it clear this cruelty is untold among relatives, friends, colleagues, neighbors, everywhere.
So the whole thesis comes down to this contradiction. The poor should unite, but when they bully each other, they're even crueler than their actual oppressors. They can't afford compassion because they're terrified of losing their own tiny, precarious foothold.
Which sets up this massive claim. If 75% of suffering is this mutual torment, he concludes that if the bullying just stopped, the world would become a paradise.
Regardless of the government or natural disasters?
It's a powerful incentive. So the question becomes, how do you stop it? How do you cure a pathology that's infected an entire society?
Well, the author immediately throws out all the traditional moral solutions. He says they're basically futile.
Right. He says preaching, benevolence, justice, wisdom, all that is not very effective. He points out that religious teachings haven't stopped it for thousands of years.
The incidents of poor bullying the poor have never ceased or even decreased.
Which raises a really interesting question for you, the listener. If self-interest always beats conscience, is this source basically saying that moral teachings are useless in any society with material anxiety?
It seems so. The source is explicit. Moral preaching is no match for reality. When people are faced with a choice between their vital interests and their conscience, they'll pick their interests every single time.
It's a pretty cynical view, but maybe a pragmatic one.
So if morality fails, what's the structural problem? And the source is crystal clear on this. The engine of all this anxiety is private ownership, the concept of sigzi.
And surprisingly, he also points a finger at marriages and families as part of this anxiety structure.
The logic is that private ownership and family create these small, separate material units. This creates this intense anxiety about providing for your own little circle. So if that's the problem,
The only way to get rid of the bullying is to get rid of the anxiety.
to dispel the fears about all the basic necessities, food, clothing, shelter, birth, old age, sickness, and death.
His argument is that once you remove those fears, the need to viciously protect your own little pile of resources just disappears. Then, and only then, can morality actually take root.
He uses this really compelling analogy to drive it home. He says it's impossible to tell a young, single person to suppress their longing for intimacy with just moral instruction. You can't teach them Buddhism or tell them to be a saint and expect it to work.
The cure isn't a sermon.
No. The cure is accessibility contact with the opposite sex. You have to address the real material need, not just preach conscience into a void.
Which makes a structural solution the only option. And that brings us to his ultimate conclusion. If private ownership creates the anxiety, and the anxiety creates the cruelty, what's the cure for society?
He's unequivocal. The only path to end this tragedy is for the poor to enter a communist society.
Right, where private ownership is gone and everyone's needs are met universally. Only then, he says, will pour-on-pour bullying finally vanish.
Now, he knows what he's doing by using the C word. He knows he risks losing his audience right there.
Oh, absolutely. He acknowledges that people see communism as an impossible utopian fantasy, a slogan, or even, an evil spirit aligned with the devil.
He points out that almost nobody really believes in it anymore, not even the party members who swear an oath to fight for it. For them, it's just a slogan.
So he presents it as this universally doubted, but scientifically necessary solution, which makes his next move So incredibly audacious.
He doesn't just leave it as a theory.
No. He says he has real-world, empirical proof that true communism isn't some fantasy. He points to a specific community that he says has already achieved it in China for over a decade.
The new oasis for life.
Created by a group called Lifechanyuan.
And by detailing what's happening in this community, the source claims to show how this conflict gets resolved in practice. He says it's made up entirely of the poor, but, and this is the critical part, mutual bullying has basically disappeared.
And the reason it disappeared is because the anxiety is gone.
Exactly. The source says the members are respected and cared for, especially the honest and diligent ones, because all their essential concerns, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, old age, sickness, all of it, have been eliminated from their lives.
The argument is, since the anxiety is gone, there's just no need to bully anyone. And the result, he claims, is a complete transformation of behavior.
He describes the men becoming responsible, masculine, and modest gentlemen, and the women becoming caring and tender gentlewomen.
He calls the community thoroughly beautiful.
The logical chain, in his view, is complete and proven. Remove the material fear, and the inherent goodness of people just corrects itself.
What a journey. I mean, this source defines poverty so broadly, claims internal cruelty is responsible for 75% of suffering, dismisses all moral solutions, and then points to this one single community as the only path to liberation.
My final thought, just based on the source's own logic, is this. The whole argument stands on the principle that you can't have morality and compassion until you get rid of material anxiety.
They're a precondition.
It seems so. So if, as the source suggests, all our fears about food, shelter, safety, and death have to be resolved before we can even start to be compassionate, what does that imply about moral and religious solutions in any society where basic security isn't guaranteed for everyone?
Are they all just doomed to be ineffective slogans?
That's the question he leaves you with?
It's a profound question to chew on as you go about your day. Thank you for walking us through this incredibly challenging and fascinating source.
Always a pleasure.